late summer 1925. But Thomas did get a letter from Milo, telling him how pleased she was to hear he was helping Andy to read. He sat on his bed, and read it through 3 times. Nothing, absolutely nothing in it about the spring, and the terms they had parted on, or her time in Germany and Denmark, or her return to Cambridge. "I am delighted you are teaching him," Milo had written. "It is good you have made a friend." And inside the letter she had enclosed a short document about the principles of teaching reading which she had got from Professor Lewis in the English language department. Thomas closed his eyes. Typical Milo, he thought. And then he thought of how much he did know her, and that the little respect he had given her when he was at her graduation must have upset her. If she was having a love affair with Heisenberg, she would have told him. Thomas had been wrong not to trust her. Milo was the last person to be seduced into anything. So he picked up a sheet of paper and began to write, about the house, and the lessoning of staff, and of the children in the house, just George and Marigold, who is, in effect, daughter to Lady Edith, he added, though Thomas thought, the in effect bit was quite untrue. Facts, just facts, as Milo liked them. Thomas told her of Mr. Mason being granted a farm, and Andy had expressed an interest in farming. It was a good job, though not to Thomas's mind. He did admire anyone who could work on the land, make food from nothing, although better for him was to be able to make a device for measuring the passing of time. Henry, his brother, was never as good as Thomas, although he had had the tenacity to persevere with the watch he had mended for him, at Milo's commission. He missed her. That was the awful truth. Whether it was because she was grown now, and no longer needed him, or whether it was just because she wasn't there. Milo liked to hear of Downton, and that was the worrying thing, if he was laid off, or if he was forced to find a job somewhere else, for he needed someone to come into a clockmaker's with him, and he would never let Milo's house again. Another thread between them would be broken. Perhaps the last thread. Thomas was just walking back from the village, having ignored the box in the hall for speed, when Mrs. Hughes called him into her sitting room. Half expecting a talking to for something, he waited, but Mrs. Hughes crossed and closed the door behind him. Then, she gave him a wedding invitation. "Mrs. Hughes, Thomas began. He had assumed staff were to be invited as a matter of course, rather than them needing the formality of an invitation, especially from a man who actively disliked Thomas. "No," Mrs. Hughes interrupted him, holding up a hand. "Miss Ashby was here for a matter of 2 days, and it was good to see her. I feel she is part of this house, as you are, as we all are. We would very much like her to be there." There was a silence. "Yes, what was stopping her from posting it, then?" "What do you think, Mr. Barrow?" Mrs. Hughes asked. "About what?" "Will she come, if I invite her?" "She is as much Downton as anyone, and I like the girl." Thomas looked at the invitation, and then back to Mrs. Hughes. A plan formed in his mind. I don't know," Thomas told her. "She has just got back from Germany, from the Physics Institute, who asked for her," he embellished. "Well, I know that, Thomas," Mrs. Hughes told him. "But that's the thing. She's going back soon. She's pushing herself very hard. I've raised it with Rutherford. He hadn't, of course, so I think some time here would do her good. And now for the kill. Do you think you could help me persuade Mr. Carson? I just need 1 night away, and he can take my next 2 half-days, which he will need to if his lordship wishes me to step up while you are on your honeymoon." It couldn't have gone better. Not only did he look like the concerned husband, he might be able to wangle a day off to go and see her and sort out their relationship with one another, and he might well come across as the dedicated staff member. "Leave it all to me," Mrs. Hughes told him. "As for the 2 days, you shall have it, just you see if you don't. And as for stepping up, well, before he had left the next morning, he had Lord Grantham practically eating off his hand. They needed staff they could rely on, but could not afford to pay for a full complement. So experience spoke for itself. "Well played, Mr. Barrow," Thomas told himself, as he accepted a chauffeur journey, for quickness, to the station. "Now, for the hard part." 88,888,888. Thomas Barrow first began to feel uneasy when he disembarked from the train at Cambridge. Along Ely Street, It grew worse. Before the buildings of the university began to hove into view, he went to the Cavendish, safer, and he had more rights, so to speak. Milo was his wife. He had a good relationship with Rutherford to do with her welfare, and he might just gain some insight into how she was, or, more importantly, into her business. So it was a bit of a shock to be met by Patrick Blackett, striding along the main corridor to the offices at the front, and watch his expression change from easygoing confidence to thunderous. Mr. Barrow. His tone was harsh, and Thomas considered not unfair, under the circumstances. I have come to speak to Milo. She has not replied to any of my letters. HMPH came from Blackett, as he considered this. Wait in Chadwick's office. Is he here? Or Rutherford? Rutherford is in New Zealand. Chadwick is in Manchester. I am in charge, under Thompson, of course. Blackett, Thomas began, but he had turned and was striding away. But then, halfway along, by the door through which Milo had taken Thomas once, he turned. I had thought better of you, Barrow, considering. He shook his head a couple of times, then pressed the handle. Shall we go for a walk? Milo asked Thomas, having come out on her own, her hair tied back and an apron covering her work clothes. Some things never changed. Milo seemed to be always wearing the long black skirts and high-collared, long-sleeved blouses that were the fashion nearly 2 decades before. Yes, Thomas nodded, and Milo went back into her lab, appearing without her apron and a short coat. She turned her token around to show she was leaving, and they walked through the wide streets of the university towards the Cam, Thomas asking her how she was and getting very little substance back. Milo asking in turn, how he was out of required social conditioning. They got to the part of the river where they had often walked. Ahead of them the path to the Leonti rooms, and the accommodation building to their left, when Milo turned to Thomas. Here, she told him, and handed him a box. It had Germanic writing on it, and he lifted the lid. A watch gleamed back at him. Born, we eyes. Zecker and Strussman were on their way to visit a friend in Zurich, she told him, so Paulie and I went with them for the day. Paulie, he is the mathematician? No, he is a physicist, too, Milo told her. Dirac was to go, but he decided not to. Bourne asked if I wanted to go. HB, she broke off for a moment, and examined Thomas's face. He was in a dispute with Planck, over Schrödinger. He was in a bad mood. She looked away. I did not know people could hate so vehemently one another as those two men, she added. We went all the way from Göttingen once, Thomas, on a train to hear Schrödinger tell of his wave equation. And HB asked a question at the end. Usually, the questions are conducted with grace, with manners. But Schrödinger riled up the other guests and they all attacked Heisenberg. She shook her head. What happened then? Thomas asked, for there had been a gossip drought of late, and Heisenberg being made to feel uncomfortable was a very pleasant feeling indeed. HB stood his ground, told Schrödinger that the wave equation was all very well, but if he accepted that, he had to discredit all of the Copenhagen work. Was he the man to discredit Bohr with one paper? Milo shook her head. They continued to argue, and it ended with HB leaving, telling him the wave equation was crap. He said that? Thomas asked. That was a grave insult. Even he would not dare to use it. Really? It translates to that what he said was stronger, Milo admitted. So he waited for me outside, so we could go back on the train together. But Schrödinger tried to, well, chat me up, and tried to get me to go and get a drink with him, and so on. I shrugged it off, and left, but Schrödinger followed me, all the way to the station. He knew I was with HB, of course, so I think he was doing it to annoy him. And it probably worked, I imagine, Thomas thought to himself. Then looked down to the watch. So, this was from Zurich? Milo nodded. She was about to tell him about their holiday to Helgoland, a tiny island off the northwest German coast, just the two of them, but knew enough of Thomas's moods to hold her tongue. You always said you wanted a Swiss-made watch, so now you have one. Happy birthday and anniversary, she added. Thomas stared at her. How was it she was so so Milo? They had left in the worst possible circumstances, and now here they were talking as if they had never been apart. Milo, I have nothing for you, Thomas admitted. But Milo shook her head. "You're here, aren't you? You came back, and we are talking like we always did." She stopped walking, and sat down on a bench near the river. A punt was pushed past, by a student, with a pretty girl sitting in the seat opposite to him. Thomas sat beside her. "When you left, you were so angry," Milo went on, hanging her head. I know what you did, but you wouldn't have if I had not made you annoyed." She lifted her head. "You never wrote, in all these months." Thomas was about to protest, but Milo pushed on. "You being back with me now is the best thing you could ever give me." But Thomas was pulling out her jewelry, her delicate diamond-encrusted platinum watch, the one on the long lavalier chain, her opal necklace. "I kept these for you," he told her, and Milo nearly broke all of them in his hands when she thrust herself towards him. "Thank you, oh thank you," she exclaimed, her voice half choked. "Thomas, listen," Thomas Barrow told her, unable to accept Milo blaming herself, and he collecting the credit. "What I did was not acceptable to you." "I will never do that again, never," Thomas told her. "But yes, I was angry with you. I thought I didn't trust you, but I didn't trust myself. You are grown now, and have your own life." And the words choked in his throat. He saw Milo's eyes twinkling at him in anticipation. "If you wish for a divorce, so you can live your life, I can do it." He would force himself to. At any rate, the house, the money would, ironically, remain his. Thomas could sign them back, though. He wasn't such a bastard that he would keep them. But his secret would come out. Would there be a way to prevent it? He noticed Milo looking at him. "For me?" Milo asked, her eyes wide. "For you," he told her, "for I would stay married to you." "Then, stay married to me, Thomas Barrow." "I have not shamed you. I have not slept with another man. I have not betrayed you. But I have lived my life." "Then go on living it," Thomas told her, kindly. "And we will stay married." For it seemed to Thomas that being married to Milo was better for him than not being married, and it seemed the same applied to her, too. And he believed her when Milo said she had slept with no other man. That smirk must be wiped off Heisenberg's face by now. "And I have this for you," Thomas told her. "I did write, many times. If you didn't receive them." "Oh, I have moved," she told him, suddenly. "Surely I told you? I live above the Cavendish now, with Eileen Rutherford." Her mother went back with the professor, but with her poor health, she didn't want to. "Mrs. Chadwick comes to see we are well, and have food and so on, but to be honest, I eat over at the refectory." "When you remember," Thomas thought, looking at Milo's slightness. She used to miss meals when she was concentrating too much, and then get all ravenous. He hoped that James Chadwick's wife kept a good eye, for Milo was good at pretending everything was normal even if it wasn't. Thomas pressed the invitation into her hands. She opened it, and read the contents. Then, read it again. "Mrs. Hughes and Mr. Carson?" she asked Thomas, who nodded. "Wonders will never cease," he replied. "Oh, but she did tell me I think," Milo added, then looked at the invitation again. 15th September, she read, then looked back to Thomas. "I'll ask Blackett. You'll tell Blackett that two people who helped you grown up, who nurtured you as a child, have invited you to their special day." Milo looked at Thomas again, saying nothing for a time. "Fix it with Blackett," Milo told him, then got to her feet. "I must be getting back," she added. "I told him I'd be half an hour." He'd not know, Thomas thought, caustically. Blackett's half an hour was all of 10 minutes. 10 glorious minutes, of sheer bliss. 10 minutes. But shorter than the advertised time, so to speak. He would never know that 10 minutes again, and tried not to glare at Blackett as he held open the Cavendish's front door with his foot, smoking determinedly as he and Milo approached. Thomas gave him a scowl, not blaming Oppenheimer at that moment for leaving the man an apple adulterated with cyanide. "We are all right, Thomas," Milo told him, reaching up and kissing him on the cheek. Thomas held her close for a minute, not least for the look of the thing. "We are still doing well for one another." And Thomas nodded and agreed, feeling he had lost her all the same. 88,888,888 July 1945, Hull, Yorkshire. Downton Abbey, A. Constable Pickering said to the 12-year-old Ernst Skeltz, as they walked along the docks and up Hessel Road. "I don't know of it," he added. He gestured towards a gate, at the end of a long path. A house stood at the end. Ernst opened the gate and Stanley Pickering nodded, encouraging the young boy up after him. A sudden barking came tearing over the grass. Ernst closed the gate quickly as a pair of Yorkshire Terriers tore over to the policeman, bounded over to him, and jumped up, happily. One noticed Ernst, and began to bark at the boy, who took a few steps back. "Don't worry," Constable Pickering told him, then to the dog in a friendly manner, "Toby, come here, you pest of a thing." And he soon had both dogs bounding by his feet as he opened the front door. "Stanley, you?" came a woman's voice from inside. And before the policeman had time to reply, continued, "Go in round the back if you have the dogs with you." And with that, Stanley Pickering closed the front door, and trod the small garden path around to one side of the house, and disappeared. When Ernst hadn't followed, he took some steps back, the little terriers still in his orbit, and called, "Come round, boy." And Ernst followed tentatively, past a trellis with winding plants climbing through them of names he did not know, to a well-kept back garden, most of which was allotment. Canes and rows of vegetables stood proudly, waiting to be harvested in the next few weeks. A woman sat at a table with the back door open, her hands in a bowl of water, washing potatoes. "And who've you brought home this time?" asked the woman, though not unkindly. Her tone made Ernst believe bringing home strangers was something Constable Pickering did on a regular basis. "This is Ernst," he told his wife, and he lowered his head, keeping eyes on Ernst Skeltz, as he said something close to his ear. The woman nodded, then broke into a smile. She got to her feet, and gestured to a kitchen chair that had been brought into the garden. "Come, sit down," she told Ernst. And within 10 minutes a cup of tea was before him and a plate of biscuits, and a sandwich with mashed fish and cucumber. Ernst was hungry and he would probably have eaten most things, but the sandwich was delicious, and the tea hot and warm. What he liked best, however, were the biscuits, round and sweet, with a sprinkling of precious sugar on top. "My thanks, Mrs. Pickering," Ernst told his hostess, as she waved away his thanks, and picked up her knitting. When she turned her head, Stanley Pickering pushed his own sandwich onto Ernst's. "Don't much care for sardine, but as she tells me, the U-boats have done plenty of damage. We must be grateful for what we have." And then suddenly, the woman picked up her work, and took some steps inside. "I am sorry to hear what you have told me, young man," Constable Pickering said, kindly, placing his helmet on the table. "I am sorry that your mother and father were killed, that your life was destroyed." He glanced towards the back door through which Mrs. Pickering had gone. "Our son lost his life at the Somme." A few moments' pause followed this, and Ernst nodded, thinking about the past war, and of this one. The Skeltz family were good people, and it was only recently, when he had gone through the drawers of the bureau in the hall, that he found a button that opened a secret drawer. This had been 6 months before, just after Christmas, and Ernst had snuck back down one night and retrieved a letter that was in it. He had read it, and discovered it had been written by a woman who had written to the Skeltz family about her cry to give him up, and that she would rest knowing he had a good, happy and fulfilling life. Ernst had put the letter back then, but had gone back to retrieve it when he had fled to Holland. He had it in his case now. "Was there no one else you could have gone to?" Constable Pickering asked, picking up the teapot and dribbling about half a cup's worth out into Ernst's cup. He glanced at it, and smiled to the policeman, who had been very kind to him. "Until a few months ago, I did not even know I was adopted." "Mrs. Schumister, Ernst told him, in German. Schumeiser means teacher, but she was not a teacher. He reflected on this happy joke that his father had once pointed out to him. "Mrs. Schumister told me she would take me in, and I showed her the documents I had recovered from our ruined house. We talked about it, She made some inquiries. Ernst bowed his head. A tear fell onto his stolen trousers. "Nothing to worry about, lad," Pickering told him. "Don't you fret. Now, your mother gave her home as Downton Abbey?" Ernst nodded. "Yorkshire, England." From his pocket he brought out the adoption certificate, and the wedding certificate, that had also been in the bureau. Me Lucina Ashby. The name was clear on both documents, very clear. Constable Pickering looked over. He pointed to the other entry on the birth certificate. "My father," Ernst confirmed, looking away. Constable Pickering leaned back in his chair and gave Ernst Schultz a long look. "And why will you not say your father's name aloud?" he asked, his tone a little stricter, his words a little firmer than they had been. "Was he a Nazi? One of Hitler's men?" Ernst shuddered. How was he to unpick it all? How was he to say what was right? He knew what he had seen, had done, had felt and heard. He knew it would be different in England. Focus on the facts. What is in front of you, he told himself. It is written, here, Ernst told Pickering. I do not wish to say it aloud, because I am ashamed at what I found. He has a family, he is married. Although, I believe he married after I was born, whether he knew of me or not. Ernst trailed off, his mind filling with German words when his mouth needed to say English ones. He betrayed my mother, he added. I would be with her, but not him. He looked down, thinking of the name, feeling like spitting as his anger rose, feeling like finding something to break into 1,000 pieces. Betrayed? The question hung between them. Ernst took in the garden, endeavored over out of necessity. His idle analytical part of his brain thought. Although one part had been given over to flowers, some happiness over utility. And he thought back to Mrs. Shumister, who would probably be wondering where he was, for he had no time to tell her. She had told him that his father, name there, must gave betrayed his mother, or else his name would not have been Ashby, or Schultz. It would have been, for she named me after her brother, Ernst told Constable Pickering. Ernest Ashby. It was in the letter she had left with the Schultz family. He gave it to Stanley Pickering, who opened it and glanced over it. In English, perhaps because she had been unable to express how she felt in German. It had taken Mrs. Shumister's son-in-law to sit at her table and translate it to Ernst. I am Ernst Ashby Schultz, he told the policeman, as he passed the letter back over to Ernst. And as much as I am German I am also English, he declared. This woman me Lucina wanted me to have a good life. It was a question, rather than a statement. He wanted Constable Pickering to reassure him. The constable smiled. I think so, he told the boy, biting his tongue against the shame of the unmarriedness of it all. It was clear from the marriage certificate that this Lucina Ashby was actually married to someone else, a Mr. Thomas Barrow. It would have to be reported, all of it. He had carefully noted down everything, and when the boy was on his way, so would be sending his report up to York that night. Now, it is very late for you to carry on to Downton tonight. Do you have enough money for the train? Ernst pulled out the contents of his pockets. Assorted coins, some notes, all carefully Dutch in origin, and an American dollar and a gold necklace once belonging to Mrs. Schultz. The Reichsmarks, not only worthless, would have been a mistake in England. A sudden swell of pity filled the man. Yes, he had fire-watched, as bombs had fallen around him, and the houses between the sea and the docks. He had pulled people, alive and dead, from buildings, organized long, tiring watches with the local defense volunteers. They had been on lean rations for years, and blackouts and fuel shortages. They had done everything they could to keep the spirit going and the heart merry, not just for one another, but for the people they knew. In the city of Hull, the ports had taken the worst, and yet the fishermen still fished and wives and mothers still queued for what little they had. The grammar school had lost a roof and for 2 days lessons had been conducted above blue skies. But, this was not this boy's fault. He had escaped a place which he had known all his life to be home, lived alongside the fear and the hatred and the Nazism. And he had had the wherewithal, when the people who had raised him had been killed, to look for his real family. Just a moment, Constable Pickering told Ernst, and pushed towards him the last biscuit. He emerged from the house many minutes later, his wife beside him. Mr. Pickering tells me you are looking for your mother, your English mother? Mrs. Pickering asked. Ernst nodded. Yes, ma'am, he replied. She smiled, a big smile, reminding Ernst of his grandmother, Mrs. Schultz's mother, who had died when he was younger. Then we would be pleased to help you. Will you stay? Ernst nodded. I would be very grateful, he told her. That's settled then, she told Ernst, and turned to her husband. Mind you get him out in the garden with any jobs you wish to be done, Mrs. Pickering added. The peas are ready. We can have them with our dinner. And with that, the woman bustled back inside. She likes young people, Stanley Pickering told Ernst. And once you've helped me in the garden, we can see about getting you a bath and some clothes, and then we can find out about Downton Abbey for you. How does that sound? Ernst smiled. To his ear, it sounded very good indeed.